Jenny Parker had always been different from the people around her. While others wasted their hours scrolling on social media or gossiping, Jenny found comfort in books. She would spend hours in the quiet corner of her local library, devouring stories, histories, and above all, books about justice and truth. Her mother often told her, "Jenny, honesty is your crown. Never take it off, no matter how heavy it feels." Jenny carried these words like a treasure in her heart. She grew up believing that truth was unshakable, that it always found a way to win. Life, however, doesn't play by fair rules. One bright morning, Jenny's world collapsed. She was accused of being part of an attack on a local businessman. She had never even met the man, yet false witnesses pointed at her, and fabricated evidence tied her name to the case. Within hours, her life turned upside down. The police arrested her, neighbors whispered about her, and even close friends avoided her calls. Jenny sat behind the cold bars of a prison cell, her eyes burning with disbelief. "How can this be happening to me? I've done nothing wrong," she whispered to herself. But reality was merciless. Her first court hearing arrived. Jenny, trembling but hopeful, waited for a lawyer to defend her. But one after another, every attorney refused. Some said the case was too dangerous. Others claimed she had no chance of winning. It felt as though the world had already declared her guilty. For the first time in her life, Jenny felt abandoned. Her heart sank, but her spirit whispered something stronger. "If no one will fight for you, Jenny, then you must fight for yourself." The prison library became her sanctuary. She began pulling out law books, dictionaries, and case studies. At first, the language was overwhelming. Pages full of complicated terms, endless rules and precedents. But Jenny's determination burned brighter than her fear. Night after night, she studied under the dim prison light, taking notes, repeating arguments out loud, and memorizing case after case. The guards mocked her, the other inmates laughed, but Jenny didn't stop. Her mind was transforming. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was becoming her own lawyer. Jenny Parker, once just a girl who loved books, was now preparing for the most important battle of her life, to prove her innocence and reclaim her own. Days in prison moved slowly, but for Jenny Parker, each day became an opportunity to learn. She transformed her cell into a study corner. Stacks of borrowed books surrounded her bed. A cheap pen and a torn notebook became her weapons against the injustice she was facing. At night, when the prison fell silent, Jenny would sit by the small window of her cell, reading under the faint moonlight. Her eyes would ache, her hands would cramp from writing, but she never stopped. She whispered to herself, "One day, I'll walk out of here free, not because someone helped me, but because I refuse to give up." The prison guards noticed her unusual routine. Some mocked her. "Hey, lawyer Jenny," they sneered. "Do you think your books will open these gates?" Others simply shook their heads, believing she was wasting her time. But one guard, Officer Harris, watched her quietly. Unlike the others, he didn't laugh. He saw the fire in Jenny's eyes, the same fire he had once seen in soldiers preparing for battle. One evening, as he walked past her cell, he muttered, "Keep at it, Parker. Maybe you'll surprise us all." Jenny's reputation began to change among the inmates, too. At first, they mocked her, but soon some started approaching her with their own small problems. Letters they couldn't write, appeals they didn't understand. Jenny helped them, and slowly she earned their respect. But even as she grew stronger, the weight of loneliness pressed on her. At night, when she put down her pen, the silence of the prison walls reminded her that no family member came to visit. No friend dared to call. She was completely alone. One night, Jenny broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Why me? Why am I punished for something I didn't do?" Her chest ached with the unfairness of it all. But as she cried, her eyes fell on the open book beside her, the Constitution of the United States. On the margin of the page, someone had written, "Justice belongs to those who fight for it." Those words struck her like lightning. She wiped her tears and sat upright. "Yes," she whispered. "Justice is not given, it is fought for, and I will fight." From that night on, Jenny doubled her efforts. She began memorizing court procedures, learning how to question witnesses, and studying how to dismantle false evidence. Every page she turned, every note she wrote, became a step closer to her freedom. And then came the announcement. Her next court hearing was scheduled in 6 weeks. This time, Jenny would walk into the courtroom not as a helpless prisoner, but as her own lawyer. The morning of Jenny's next court hearing was marked in bold in her mind. 6 weeks. That was all the time she had to prepare. Every second mattered. Jenny developed a routine. She woke up before dawn, exercised lightly to keep her body strong, then spent the entire day studying. She divided her time into sections: criminal law in the morning, court procedures in the afternoon, and case studies at night. She even practiced speaking out loud, pretending the empty cell walls were the jury she had to convince. The more she studied, the more confident she became. She realized how weak the prosecution's case against her truly was. The so-called evidence was riddled with holes. The witnesses' statements were inconsistent. And yet, no one had bothered to defend her. One day, Officer Harris stopped by her cell and noticed her scattered notes. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" he asked. Jenny looked up from her papers. "It's my life. If I don't fight, who will?" Harris gave a rare half-smile. "Well, Parker, I've seen a lot of inmates come and go. Most just accept their fate. You're different. Don't lose that fire." His words gave Jenny a strange comfort. For the first time in months, she felt that someone believed in her, even if just a little. As the days went by, Jenny's reputation as the jailhouse lawyer grew stronger. Inmates sought her help to understand their own charges. She drafted letters, explained legal terms, and guided them through procedures they never understood before. Helping others gave Jenny more than respect. It gave her confidence. But confidence didn't erase fear. At night, doubts would creep in. What if I make a mistake? What if the judge laughs at me? What if they crush me with legal tricks I don't know? The thought of standing alone against trained prosecutors scared her. One evening, Jenny sat with her head in her hands, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was about to face. That's when an older inmate, Martha, approached her cell. Martha had been in prison for years and had seen many women lose hope. She looked at Jenny and said softly, "Don't let fear chain you, girl. You've already come further than anyone thought. The courtroom isn't just about laws, it's about courage. And you've got that in your blood." Jenny felt a surge of strength. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving despite it. By the time the 6 weeks ended, Jenny wasn't the same girl who had once wept in her cell. She had transformed. She stood taller, her eyes sharper, her voice steadier. She was no longer just Jenny Parker. The accused, she was Jenny Parker, the defender of her own truth. And as the morning of her hearing finally arrived, she whispered to herself, "This is my fight, and I will not lose." The courthouse stood tall and intimidating, its marble steps gleaming in the morning light. For most people, it was a place of fear, a place where lives could be ruined with a single judgment. For Jenny Parker, it was the battlefield where she would fight for her life. Dressed in the plain beige uniform of the prison, her hands cuffed, she was escorted into the courtroom. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some whispered, some stared in disbelief. Others shook their heads as if she were already guilty. Jenny could feel their judgment pressing down on her, but she lifted her chin high. The prosecutor entered with confidence, holding a thick file of papers. His smirk seemed to say, "This will be easy." The judge, a stern-looking man with silver hair, adjusted his glasses and looked at Jenny. "Ms. Parker," he said, his voice echoing in the room, "since no lawyer has agreed to represent you, the court understands you have chosen to represent yourself. Is that correct?" Jenny's voice didn't waver. "Yes, Your Honor, I will be defending myself." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A prisoner defending herself? It sounded ridiculous to many. The prosecutor chuckled quietly, confident she would collapse under the pressure. But Jenny didn't falter. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She knew the evidence against her, the lies that had been told, and the weaknesses in the prosecution's case. The hearing began. The prosecutor painted Jenny as a dangerous young woman, ambitious and reckless. He waved the police reports, pointed to the witnesses' statements, and claimed it was an open and shut case. Jenny listened carefully, her heart racing. She gripped her notes tightly, reminding herself of every hour she had spent studying. When the judge turned to her, asking if she wished to respond, she rose slowly. "Your Honor," Jenny began, her voice steady, "I am not a criminal. I have been framed, and today I will prove it." Her words caught the attention of the room. Some laughed at her courage, but others leaned forward curious. Jenny presented her first point. The timeline of the attack didn't match her whereabouts. She laid out details of where she had been, supported by records from the library. The prosecutor objected, but Jenny countered with rules she had memorized from her studies. Her sharp responses surprised even the judge. For hours, the courtroom became a duel between Jenny and the prosecution. Every time the prosecutor tried to corner her, Jenny fought back with evidence, logic, and the confidence she had built in her cell. She wasn't perfect, but she was relentless. By the end of the session, the judge leaned back, looking at her with a new expression, not of pity, but of respect. Jenny returned to her seat, exhausted but unbroken. She whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. I'm going to win this." The first hearing had ended, but Jenny knew this was only the start of a long war. The judge had allowed more sessions to continue, giving her the chance to present further evidence. Back in her prison cell, she replayed every word in her mind. She had survived the courtroom once, but she needed to be sharper, stronger, and more prepared for what was coming next. The prosecutor, clearly irritated by her performance, began digging deeper. He wanted to crush her completely in the next round. His pride couldn't accept being challenged by a prisoner with no formal training. Jenny knew he would come with more lies, more twisted evidence, and even more pressure. So she intensified her studies. The prison library became her fortress again. She spent nights reading about cross-examinations, studying how to expose contradictions in witness statements. She practiced in front of the mirror in the small restroom of her cell, repeating questions aloud until her voice carried authority. Officer Harris noticed her determination more than ever. One afternoon, as he passed by, he paused at her cell. "You remind me of my daughter," he said quietly. "She wanted to be a lawyer, too. She never made it, but seeing you fight like this, it makes me believe she's watching." Jenny looked up, surprised. It was the first time Harris had opened up to her. His words touched her heart. For months she had felt invisible, forgotten, unloved. Now she felt a flicker of support, small but powerful. The second hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed this time. News had spread about the prisoner lawyer, and people were curious to see if she could really stand up against a trained prosecutor again. Some came out of pity, others out of doubt, and a few came because they secretly admired her courage. The prosecutor wasted no time. He brought in 2 witnesses who claimed they had seen Jenny near the crime scene. They spoke with confidence, pointing at her as though she were guilty. The room seemed to tilt against her, but Jenny didn't flinch. When her turn came to cross-examine, Jenny stood with her notes, her voice calm but firm. She asked simple questions. Where exactly had the witnesses been standing? What time did they say they saw her? Could they describe what she was wearing? Slowly, cracks began to appear. One said she was in a red coat, the other said black. One claimed it was late evening, the other insisted it was morning. Their contradictions became visible to everyone in the room. Jenny pressed harder, exposing every inconsistency. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing at Jenny. They were listening to her. When the session ended, murmurs spread across the gallery. People were no longer certain she was guilty. They had seen a young woman alone, standing tall against a system designed to break her. Jenny returned to her cell that night with a fire burning in her heart. She was no longer just defending herself. She was proving to the world that truth, no matter how lonely, could still fight back. Jenny lay awake the night after the second hearing, staring at the ceiling of her cell. For the first time since her arrest, she felt hope, not just a fragile wish, but a solid belief that she could actually win. The witnesses' contradictions had shaken the courtroom. She knew the prosecutor would not let this humiliation stand. He would return with heavier weapons. And he did. At the next hearing, the prosecutor presented physical evidence. A knife allegedly found near the crime scene with Jenny's fingerprints on it. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. For many, this seemed like the final nail in her coffin. Jenny's heart pounded, but she steadied herself. She had prepared for this. When the judge allowed her to examine the evidence, Jenny asked sharp questions. Where was this knife kept after it was found? Who handled it? Was it sealed properly? Can you provide a chain of custody record? Her questions caught the prosecution off guard. The detective on the stand hesitated, fumbling through his answers. It became clear that the evidence had not been handled according to proper procedure. There were gaps, unexplained delays, and missing records. Jenny seized the moment. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "this so-called evidence is tainted. It cannot be trusted as proof of guilt." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. The prosecutor, red-faced, tried to argue back. but the damage was done. The jury had seen the cracks. Back in prison, Jenny felt exhausted but proud. She had dismantled another lie. The inmates cheered for her when she returned. To them, she wasn't just Jenny Parker anymore. She was a warrior. Some even whispered, "If she can fight, maybe we can too." But the journey wasn't without pain. Nights were still lonely. She longed for a familiar voice, a letter, a sign that her family still cared. But weeks turned into months and no one came. Jenny realized that her fight had to be fought alone. One evening, Martha, the older inmate who had once encouraged her, sat beside her. "Jenny, you know what you're doing? You're not just defending yourself. You're teaching us all that even when the world abandons you, you don't abandon yourself." Jenny smiled faintly. "I don't know if I'll win, Martha, but I know I can't stop. If I do, then they've already beaten me." As the next hearing approached, Jenny focused on one strategy: exposing the corruption behind her false accusation. She started digging into public records, reading about the businessman who had accused her. The more she read, the more suspicious it became. His past was filled with shady deals, enemies, and lawsuits. Why would he suddenly frame an innocent girl? Jenny sensed that the truth was bigger than her case. She wasn't just fighting for freedom, she was fighting against a system that thrived on silencing the powerless. And deep inside, she made a silent vow: "If I win this, I won't stop here. I'll make sure no other girl has to go through what I'm going through." The courtroom was tense when Jenny Parker entered for her next hearing. Word of her relentless defense had spread, and this session attracted reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to witness the prisoner lawyer in action. Jenny, however, focused only on one thing: the truth. The prosecutor brought in new witnesses, claiming they had direct proof linking her to the crime. Their testimonies were confident, their tone convincing. Yet Jenny had spent countless nights preparing for this exact moment. She stood, her voice steady, and began her cross-examination. "Can you describe exactly what you saw?" she asked the first witness. I saw her outside the store," he stammered. "And what time exactly?" "Around 7:30, he replied. Jenny calmly referenced the store's surveillance records she had, obtained from a local friend. "According to this tape, you could not have possibly seen me there at that time." "Do you deny this evidence?" the witness faltered. His confident facade cracked under Jenny's relentless questioning. The judge leaned forward, watching her carefully, while murmurs filled the courtroom. Next, she focused on the businessman who had accused her. Jenny had discovered inconsistencies in his statement and patterns of bribery and deceit. She questioned him methodically, pointing out every contradiction. The courtroom fell silent as her words struck hard. The prosecutor tried to intervene, but Jenny had anticipated his moves. "Objection noted, Your Honor. However, this is relevant to establishing the credibility of the accusations," she said, citing rules she had memorized. Even the judge seemed impressed by her knowledge and precision. By the end of the hearing, Jenny had successfully exposed holes in every major point of the prosecution's case. The witnesses who had seemed so sure of themselves now looked confused and unsure. The prosecutor's confidence had been shaken. Outside the courtroom, a few reporters approached her. "Jenny, how did you manage to defend yourself so well?" they asked. Jenny smiled faintly. "I had no choice. I had to fight for the truth. And sometimes fighting alone is the only way to succeed." Back in her cell, Jenny reflected on the progress she had made. The journey was far from over, but she had learned something important. The world might abandon you, lie about you, or try to break you, but determination and courage could turn even the loneliest struggle into victory. Martha, the older inmate, gave her a rare smile. "You're not just winning your case, Jenny. You're winning hearts. You've shown everyone here that courage and knowledge can beat fear and deceit." Jenny's mind was already planning her next steps. She realized that winning the case wasn't just about freedom. It was about justice, fairness, and sending a message that lies could not overpower the truth. As she lay down to rest, Jenny whispered to herself, "I will not just survive this. I will rise from it, stronger, wiser, and unbroken." The days passed, and Jenny Parker's case began to attract wider attention. Lawyers, students, and even journalists were intrigued by the story of a young woman defending herself from behind prison bars. Many admired her courage, though a few skeptics still whispered that she was overstepping her bounds. Jenny didn't care about opinions. She was focused on facts, evidence, and strategy. She spent her days meticulously organizing her notes, reviewing witness statements, and preparing arguments for the upcoming hearings. Every detail mattered. A single mistake could undo weeks of hard work. Her relationship with Officer Harris deepened. Though still professional, he often offered small pieces of advice or guidance about courtroom etiquette. One afternoon, he quietly said, "Jenny, always remember, it's not about intimidating the court. It's about showing the truth. Speak calmly and people will listen." Jenny nodded, absorbing every word. She realized that confidence wasn't about aggression. It was about clarity, patience, and preparation. The next hearing arrived, and this time, Jenny brought a surprise: testimony from a witness who could confirm her alibi. With the witness on the stand, Jenny guided their answers with precision, ensuring that each statement reinforced her innocence. The courtroom tension grew as she cross-examined more prosecution witnesses. Each question was carefully calculated to reveal inconsistencies and contradictions. Jenny was relentless, but she never let anger cloud her judgment. Her voice remained steady, her tone polite, her focus absolute. Even the judge, a man who had seen countless cases, leaned forward in interest. Could see that Jenny was not just reading from notes. She had internalized every fact, every rule, and every procedure. She was a formidable presence in the courtroom. The prosecutor, increasingly frustrated, tried aggressive tactics to intimidate her. He interrupted, raised his voice, and attempted to confuse the witnesses. But Jenny anticipated his moves. She countered with rules she had memorized and evidence she had, painstakingly prepared. With every rebuttal, her confidence grew, and so did the doubt in the prosecution's case. Back in her cell that night, Jenny reflected on how far she had come. Just months ago, she had felt helpless and abandoned. Now she was transforming. Not only her own fate, but also the perception of what a determined individual could achieve. Martha, the older inmate, came to her cell and said softly, "Jenny, you're becoming an example for everyone here. Your fight is bigger than you think. You're showing people that even in chains, the mind is free." Jenny smiled, feeling a deep sense of purpose. She realized that her fight was no longer only for her own freedom. It was for truth, justice, and hope. And as she prepared for the next phase of the hearings, she whispered to herself, "No matter how long it takes, no matter how hard they push, I will see this through. Justice will be mine." The following hearing was perhaps the most critical one yet. Jenny Parker entered the courtroom with a calm, determined expression. She had spent countless nights preparing for this exact day. Every argument, every question, every piece of evidence had been rehearsed until it felt second nature. The prosecutor, visibly annoyed by her prior successes, tried to intimidate Jenny with complex legal jargon and aggressive questioning. He believed that no prisoner could match a trained lawyer. But Jenny remained unshaken. She had already faced doubt, fear, and isolation. Nothing in the courtroom could break her now. Jenny began by presenting her carefully collected evidence. She laid out timelines, alibis, and witness statements with clarity and precision. The jury, initially skeptical, leaned forward as she dismantled the prosecution's case point by point. Every contradiction she exposed, every flaw she revealed, brought a ripple of murmurs through the room. One key moment came when she cross-examined the businessman who had accused her. Jenny asked calmly but firmly, "Can you explain why your statements today directly contradict your earlier testimony?" The businessman's confident demeanor faltered. Sweat appeared on his forehead and his voice wavered. The courtroom went silent. Jenny continued, highlighting his motive and past suspicious dealings, subtly demonstrating why he might have framed her. Even the judge could not hide his impression. He occasionally leaned forward, listening intently, clearly noting the logic in Jenny's arguments. Outside the courtroom, reporters scribbled furiously. They had never seen anything like this. A young woman, alone, taking on seasoned legal professionals and exposing corruption. Her story was quickly spreading beyond the courtroom walls. Back in her cell that evening, Jenny reflected on the day. She felt the exhaustion in her bones, yet a newfound strength surged within her. She had faced the most challenging part of the hearings and survived. Not just survived, she had triumphed over fear and uncertainty. The inmates, inspired by her courage, began referring to her as a symbol of hope. Jenny found herself helping even more of them, explaining small legal rights and encouraging them to stand tall in the face of adversity. She realized her fight had grown beyond her own freedom. It had become a beacon for others. Martha visited her again. "Jenny, You're not just defending yourself anymore. You're setting a standard for what it means to fight for justice. People will remember this long after today." Jenny smiled faintly, exhausted but determined. "I can't stop now," she whispered. "I have to see this through. Not just for me, but for everyone who has been silenced or ignored. I will prove that truth matters." And as she laid down to rest, she silently vowed that the upcoming hearings would be her strongest yet. Jenny Parker was no longer just a prisoner. She was a fighter, a voice for justice, and a living example that courage and determination could overcome even the most impossible. The next hearing arrived, and Jenny Parker felt a mixture of nerves and determination. Months of preparation had led to this day. She had studied every angle, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. She was ready. The courtroom was packed. Many came to watch history unfold. A young woman, alone, taking on the legal system. The prosecutor tried his usual aggressive tactics, raising his voice, interrupting, and attempting to fluster her. Jenny, however, remained calm. She spoke clearly, steadily, and with authority. Jenny's strategy was simple: expose the lies, show the truth, and present her own evidence convincingly. She began by summarizing the contradictions in the witnesses' statements, showing how their accounts did not align with the physical evidence. She presented timelines, receipts, and documents she had painstakingly gathered. Each piece she presented reinforced her innocence. The most critical moment came when she called a surprise witness, a librarian who could confirm her location during the alleged crime. The librarian testified that Jenny had been in the library at the exact time the attack occurred. The testimony left the courtroom in stunned silence. Even the prosecution struggled to respond. Jenny's cross-examination of the prosecution witnesses was relentless but precise. She asked pointed questions, highlighted inconsistencies, and drew attention to motives. Every answer revealed another flaw in the case against her. The jury leaned in, listening intently, and the judge's expression softened, showing recognition of her thorough preparation and sharp mind. Outside the courtroom, the news of Jenny's performance spread quickly. Reporters called her a phenomenon, and people began to admire her courage. She became an inspiration to young women and anyone facing injustice. Her story was being shared far beyond the city, sparking conversations about truth, courage, and self-reliance. Back in her prison cell that night, Jenny allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. She had survived another grueling session and had successfully challenged the prosecution's strongest points. Yet she knew the fight was not over. Martha visited her cell again, this time smiling proudly. "Jenny, people are talking about you, not just here but outside. You've shown everyone that one person can make a difference." Jenny smiled faintly. "I'm not doing this for recognition, Martha. I'm doing this because it's right. If I stop now, lies will win." Her nights were still lonely, but the fear that once haunted her had begun to fade. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. Every day, every hearing, and every argument strengthened her resolve. Jenny Parker had transformed from a scared, lonely prisoner into a determined, knowledgeable fighter for truth. She had learned the power of preparation, the strength of logic, and the importance of perseverance. And as the next hearing approached, she knew she was ready to face the final challenges that would determine her freedom. The courtroom was silent as Jenny Parker entered for what would likely be the final hearings. Months of relentless preparation, sleepless nights, and unwavering determination had led her here. She was no longer the frightened girl who had first entered the prison. She was a fighter, armed with knowledge and courage. The prosecutor, now visibly frustrated and exhausted from trying to outmaneuver her, brought forth his strongest witnesses and evidence yet. He hoped to overwhelm her, expecting her to falter under the pressure. But Jenny remained calm. She had anticipated every move, every possible argument, and had prepared counterpoints for each. As the session began, Jenny systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. She highlighted inconsistencies, exposed false statements, and brought forward compelling alibi evidence. Each point she made was precise, measured, and impossible to ignore. The jury began to shift in their perception. The once confident prosecutor now seemed on shaky ground. A particularly tense moment arose when she questioned a key witness who had directly implicated her. Jenny's questions were clear, direct, and thorough. Step by step, she revealed contradictions and uncertainties that made the witness falter. The judge, impressed by her meticulous approach, quietly noted her professionalism and sharp legal mind. Outside the courtroom, journalists captured every moment, eager to report the story of the prisoner lawyer who refused to give up. People were inspired by her courage, perseverance, and determination. Jenny Parker had become more than a defendant. She had become a symbol of hope, strength, and the power of self-reliance. Back in her cell, Jenny allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She thought about the months of struggle, the lonely nights, and the countless hours spent studying. Every challenge she had faced had strengthened her resolve. She had grown not only as a person but as a fighter for justice. Martha, who had watched Jenny's journey from the beginning, visited her cell with a proud smile. "Jenny, you've done what many thought impossible. You've proven that truth, determination, and courage can overcome even the most difficult obstacles." Jenny nodded, her mind already focused on the final moments of the trial. "This isn't just about me," she whispered. "It's about standing up for justice, for anyone who has been silenced or wronged. I have to see this through to the end." She spent the next days revising her notes, practicing her arguments, and preparing for the final courtroom session. Every detail mattered. Every word could make the difference between freedom and continued imprisonment. Jenny Parker had come a long way from the frightened girl who had first entered prison. She had fought alone, faced immense challenges, and emerged stronger, smarter, and unbreakable. And as the final hearing approached, she knew that she was ready to claim her freedom, not just legally, but morally, proving that courage and truth could triumph over injustice. The final hearing arrived. Jenny Parker stepped into the courtroom with a sense of calm determination. Months of preparation, struggle, and unwavering focus had brought her here. This was the moment that would decide her fate. The prosecutor presented his last arguments, his tone sharp and confident. He expected Jenny to crack, to show the strain of months spent fighting alone. But Jenny was ready. She had memorized the facts, prepared her evidence, and anticipated every attack. Jenny rose to present her final defense. Her voice, steady and clear, filled the courtroom. She recounted the false accusations, highlighted every inconsistency in the witnesses' statements, and presented her meticulously collected evidence. She explained how the timeline of events made it impossible for her to be at the scene of the crime and called upon the librarian who confirmed her alibi once more. The courtroom was silent. The judge listened intently, occasionally nodding, as Jenny's arguments revealed the flaws in the prosecution's case. The jury, who had previously been skeptical, now appeared convinced by her clear and logical presentation. Jenny concluded her final statement, her voice unwavering. "Your Honor, I stand before you not just as a defendant, but as a person fighting for truth. I have been abandoned by the system, yet I have not abandoned myself. The evidence proves my innocence, and I ask that justice be done." The judge leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. After a long pause, he spoke. "After reviewing all evidence and testimony, it is clear that the defendant has been wrongly accused. Jenny Parker, you are hereby declared innocent of all charges. You are free to go." A wave of relief and disbelief washed over Jenny. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that her fight, her determination, and her relentless study had finally paid off. She had not only defended herself but had done so with grace, intelligence, and courage. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed to capture her story. People were inspired by her bravery and resilience. Jenny Parker had become more than a symbol of innocence. She had become an example of how courage, knowledge, and determination could overcome even the most impossible odds. Back in her life, free from prison walls, Jenny reflected on her journey. She realized that her struggle had transformed her. She had learned the value of perseverance, the power of truth, and the strength that comes from fighting for what is right. Jenny's story spread far and wide, inspiring countless people. She received letters and messages from young women and men who had faced injustice, telling her how her courage had given them hope. Jenny understood that her battle was not just about her freedom. It was about showing the world that even one determined person could make a difference. And as she walked out into the sunlight for the first time in months, Jenny Parker smiled, knowing that she had not only won her case but had become a living example of courage, justice, and the power of truth